Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Asha Kothari Chaudhary and I am a professor of English at Guwahati University. The course we are doing is Indian Writing in English, and the module that we are looking at now is called Situating Indian English Writing. The attempt to read or write the history of Indian writing in English is critically embroiled in the problematic of using the proper terminology Indian English literature or Indo-Anglian literature, as evident in the continuous debate on the notion of Indianness. Now, this module, Situating Indian English Writing, is an attempt to address the fraught context of the emergence of literary writing in English and deals with the context of self-fashioning of historical, social, and cultural and literary imaginary of the word Indian. Now, having experienced the history of colonial encounter of the British, the historical, ideological, as well as the theoretical questions of using an alien language to express the essence of Indian sensibility forms the core of the problem of interpretation. Now, the history of Indian writing in English is viewed through the prism of cultural translation and consequent assimilation. This history of the colonial encounter with the British is categorically important for any reading of the history of Indian writing in English. The influential impact of the 1813 Charter Act and the ensuing 1835 English Education Act of William Bentinck are noteworthy contributions to the wide circulation of English language and literature, thereby contributing again to a cultural archive that is borrowed and mediated in nature. However, the early 20th century witnesses the surge of Indianness in terms of form, content, style of writing, all of which parallel the simultaneous processes of the rise of nationalism. Now, the idea of a national awakening in terms of a unified national imaginary has been predominant. This module aims to offer perspectives on the reading of a history by opening a dialogic terrain where social, political, or economic conditions influence, reconfigure, interact, reconceptualize the imaginative and intellectual processes and the ensuing literary representations of history. The larger issues of historiography or nation or nationalism, the intricate kind of relationship between imagining or fashioning the self in the context of a nation state or the process of acculturation, etc., will be addressed. Other modules that we will further on later read are designed to understand the literature that adumbrates such interpretative perspectives. Each module will deal with illustrative analysis of representative texts from all relevant genres: prose, poetry, drama, novel, and an attempt has been made to proceed in the chronological order to offer a coherent kind of a perspective. This module has the objective to, number one, address the raging debate on Indianness. Number two, to read the history of the colonial encounter with the British. Number three, address the historical as well as theoretical questions of using an alien language to express the essence of Indian sensibilities. And lastly, it will try to critically read the history of Indian writing in English. So, what are the issues that surround this notion of what we are now referring to as a history of Indian English literature? In this section, what we will look at is the unfolding of the complex histories of Indianness or being Indian in the context of the colonial encounter and the ensuing emergence of a cultural space where British cultural codes get embedded into Indian writing in English. The educational reforms initiated by the British thrive on the Enlightenment idea of progressive liberalization, and our aim is to trace the politics and context of the imitative aspect of the beginning years, the emergence of the nationalist rhetoric in the 20th century, and the consequent restructuring and reshaping of the concepts of nation and nationalism or nationhood in the subsequent years. Let us now begin with the consideration of the beginnings of the English language on Indian soil. English actually comes into India years before the East India Company comes into existence, with a Roman Catholic father, Thomas Stephens, who comes to India to escape persecution in Elizabethan England around 1578. India is then seen to be an enchanting place for traders and merchants. A host of them come, people like John Newbery, Ralph Fitch, William Leeds, James Story, and so many others. Some of them are also writers, as we see in Ralph Fitch's account that appears in Richard Hakluyt's Principal Navigations in 1599. The influence of such representative cases of missionary and merchant or mercantile activities is important for the flourishing of Indian English literature. The English come into India around 1660, when the factories of the East India Company, along with the Malabar and Coromandel coasts, begin to prosper. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the gradual interaction between the British and the Indian, especially in the employment zone, leads to a creation of a class of Dubashis, or bilingual, familiar with French, English, Dutch, and Portuguese. The Indians employed by the Europeans and the Europeans working for the Indian rulers together initiate the first stage of linguistic transmission. And gradually, the company, which initially came for trade, slowly becomes the virtual ruler and administrator of the country and starts to train a category of people to work for them in offices as clerks and mediators. By 1757, the company has already established as the virtual ruler of Bengal, and the establishment of schools and colleges become a strategic part in the consolidation of power, leading to the Orientalist phase of colonial rule. So what exactly is Orientalism in this context of India and Indian history? Now, the Charter Act of 1813 imposed an official responsibility upon the company to educate the Indian natives. During the last quarter of the 18th century, the British Parliament, worried with the growing power of a commercial company, undertook a serious and active interest in Indian politics. And the greatest concern of the Parliament was now the moral depravity of the officials and in the politics that got now a new dimension. As a result, Orientalism was adopted as an official policy, partly out of expediency and caution, and partly out of an emergent political sense that an efficient Indian administration rested on an understanding of Indian culture. With Orientalism, the worlds of scholarship and politics, as Gauri Vishwanathan has put it, merged into a poetics of representation. Anglicism, or the policy of regarding the promotion of indigenous Indian languages and literatures in native education instrumental to the undesirable and chaotic consequences, is considered contrary to Orientalism. The Anglicist-Orientalist controversy paved the way for close involvement of Englishmen like James Harrington or J.P. Larkins, Henry Shakespeare, John C. Sutherland, and a host of other such Englishmen with Indian and political cultural life during the period from 1805 to 1820. Horace Wilson, who was then the secretary to the Committee of Public Instruction, advocated various reforms in the Indian curriculum to bring in the teaching of European science and English literature along with the Oriental languages. The other prominent voices were those of Macaulay, Charles Trevelyan, and Alexander Duff. The Charter Act of 1813 is instrumental in introducing the missionary activities into Indian soil, and it granted these missionaries with the required power and scope to carry out reforms. Ironically, the reformist activities were related to the improvement of native morals. Hence, English education was intricately linked with the British government's policies of exerting and reinforcing its power and domination over India. Now, according to the Charter Act of 1813, a sum of not less than 1 lakh rupees was kept for the improvement of native education. The Charter Act of 1813 is actually instrumental in introducing missionary activity to India, as it grants the missionaries with required power and scope to carry out reforms. Now, most of these reformist activities were actually related to improvement of native morals. Hence, English education was intricately linked with the British government's policies of exerting and reinforcing its power and domination over India in every way. According to this Charter Act, a sum of not less than 1 lakh rupees was actually kept aside for this purpose. The impact of the Charter Act of 1813 on English education in India is immense, as gradually the introduction of English literature into India becomes the solution to the existing tension between two spheres: the spread of Indian education and the issue of interference in religion. A clause within the Charter Act aimed for the revival and improvement of literature, but the term was not really properly defined and was kept vague until Thomas Babington Macaulay famously interpreted it as Western literature in his famous minutes of 1835. So how do we link up Macaulay's minute to the Indian Renaissance of the 19th century? If you look at the turn of events from Macaulay's minutes to the logical outcome of Sir Charles Wood's dispatches, we find that the establishment of the 3 first Indian universities happening, those of Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, in 1857. Now, these universities soon become the nurseries of the resurgent Indian genius, which within hardly a generation thereafter ushers in the Renaissance in the political, social, or cultural literary spheres of Indian life. As a consequence of Macaulay's minutes of 1835, William Bentinck, the Governor-General, adopts then the English Education Act, under which the teaching of English was removed from the Sanskrit College and the madrasas and confined to institutions devoted to the studies entirely conducted in English. On 7th March 1835, William Bentinck declared that the great object of the British government ought to be the promotion of European literature and science among the natives of India, and that all funds would be appropriated for the purpose of education and would be best employed on English education alone. A period of Anglicization, distinguished by the promise of a renewed aspiration and national consciousness in terms of knowledge production, resurfaced in 1835 onwards. It triggered tremendous support among native Indians. In 1854, Sir Charles Wood's dispatch to Lord Dalhousie, who was the then Governor-General, negotiated the problems arising out of this situation and is remembered for the spread of English education in India. During the 20 years between 1835 and 1855, the number of English-speaking persons increased, thereby contributing to the emergence, promotion, and growth of Indian English literature. K.R.S. Iyengar calls the years from 1835 to 1855 the phoenix hour that bred Indo-Anglian literature. The imposition of English-centered education in India led to the literary renaissance in India seen in Raja Ram Mohan Roy's essay called A Defense of Hindu Theism that came out in 1817. By the early 20th centuries, we find the introduction of English literature has become crucial to the very survival of the colonial enterprise. To elaborate, English literary studies is introduced in India much before their inclusion in educational curriculums in England in 1871. Whereas in India, we witness the demand for the adoption of English literary study as early as 1816, exemplified in the setting up of the Hindu College. Charles Grant's idea of reinforcing the colonial authority and redressing religious and cultural difference through educational aspects materialized in the case of the committee comprising Alexander Duff, who is a missionary, Charles Trevelyan, who is the administrator, and W.H. Pierce, who undertake the task of selecting and prescribing literary texts that are suitable for Indian libraries and schools. But the real challenge for the colonial administration was to separate the religious and the secular aspects of the British presence in the country, as it was found that the English literary text from Shakespeare or Addison or Bacon or Locke were replete with moral and religious elements. Hence, Grant's proposal to invest on moral education of Indians was materialized through the adoption of the study of English literary texts. Seen in this context, English literary study was instrumental in the teaching of the tenets of Christianity in India, as well as in the moral and cultural training of the officials. Interestingly, Lord Hardinge, Governor General from 1844 to 1848, declared that Indians with an expertise in European literature would be preferred for working in public office run by the British. The early 20th century was distinguished by the Great Revolt of 1857 and is also referred to as the First War of Indian Independence. The end of the Great Revolt of 1857 and the declaration of peace on 8 July 1858 brought to an end the activities of the East India Company in India. The East India Company was formally dissolved in 1874, corresponding to a period of religious, social, and political reform. The reformist era was similar to 1828 when Raja Ram Mohan Roy had first established the Brahmo Samaj. After his death, this movement was further propagated by Keshav Chandra Sen, while similar organizations like the Prarthana Samaj were set up by M.G. Ranade and R.G. Bhandarkar in 1867 in Bombay. Swami Dayanand Saraswati set up the Arya Samaj in 1875 in the cultural turn towards an earlier, purer form of Hinduism. Now, another kind of support to this wave of revivalism came from the Theosophical Society, which was founded in New York by Madame H.P. Blavatsky, Colonel Olcott, and W.O. Judge, besides others. Moreover, the Indian National Congress came into existence in 1885 and thereby was paved the way towards a kind of political unity. The outbreak of the World War I challenged the core of the British imperialism, and gradually we begin to witness the rise of the new Indian intelligentsia. During the period from 1857 to 1947, the Indian spirit was marked by a radical transformation from all quarters. It was a phoenix hour when India was able to transcend the sense of inferiority and frustration and rediscovered her own identity. The sense of self-confidence and self-awareness marks the period of renewed self-assessment and exploration of other, newer opportunities. Henceforth, the Indian nation was on the verge of a period of renewed hope and expectation, which eventually led to the emergence of a national consciousness that translated in the form of a strategic articulation of myriad possibilities in various contexts, literature being the most prominent among them all. The age is marked by the exploration of the exclusivity of the Indian identity in the context of the emergence and evolution of Indian nationalism. As we proceed to offer an insight into the various historical processes influencing literary writing, it is found that literary creations participate in the creation of a national imaginary in terms of the discourse of imperialism and nationalism. The strategic evolution of such ideological and cultural formations in terms of articulating Indian national identity is explored in the plethora of writings imbued with nationalist rhetoric by Aurobindo Ghosh, by Rabindranath Tagore, Jawaharlal Nehru, Niraj Chaudhary, and so on, all of which draw attention to the processes of identity formation. When we come to the post-independence period, we see that this is a period that is marked by a rapid and overwhelming change in economic, political, social, or cultural spheres. In economics, it is seen that it is an era of development in the form of implementation of the 5-year plans, the emergence of large industrial projects in the public sector, community development projects, and the nationalization of life insurance and banks, multipurpose river projects, agrarian reforms, and so on. 1956 is an important year when the boundaries of states are redrawn on the basis of language. In the social sphere, efforts to eradicate traditional social inequality and superstition is translated into the adoption of progressive measures such as the Untouchability Offences Act of 1955, the Hindu Code Bill, and so on. Several schemes were launched to address the persistent issues related to social development. Consequently, the country witnessed a rise in national literacy rates by 75% between 1951 and 1971. The growing number of readership along with the increasing literacy rate gives impetus to the continuity of engaging with Indian English literature. The English journals like the Illustrated Weekly of India or Quest encourage the publication of Indian English verse and prose. Moreover, the prestigious Sahitya Academy Award begins to cover Indian English literature from the year 1960. This singularly gives impetus to this language, interest in the English language, by acting as a source of inspiration for writers who write in English in independent India. The gradual awakening of a national identity in the post-independence period infused the Indian writings with a renewed sense of self-confidence and assertion. The fact of gaining political independence from colonial rule in 1947 was the harbinger of a new era in literature as well as culture. The historic moment not only helped the Indian English writer to affirm the sense of identity, it also led to an era of intense self-scrutiny, whereby the vision is widened and we begin to witness an increasing growth in readership as well. Although initially the role of English was viewed through the prism of borrowed perspective, gradually the language was Indianized and became a part of the soil itself. It begins to pave the way for the strategic negation of British in terms of representation of themes and techniques specific to the articulation of the Indian national identity. The aim was also to make the reader aware of the ruptures inherent in such processes of self-articulation, as the question of identity therefore also begins to focus on the strategic exclusion of subaltern groups, essentially situated at the margins of colonial and nationalist discourses of difference. So, in this module, what we have done is that we have tried to address the problematic of Indian English literature that is mediated through the aesthetics of translating one's self into the colonizer's tongue, as the question of dominance and hegemony is intricately related to the evolution of English literary studies in India. Having said so, the module also deals with the derivative as well as creative aspects of Indian writing in English, as the presence of the colonial context is unique to the creation of a canon of Indian writing in English. An attempt is also made here to incorporate the representative documents like Lord Macaulay's minutes to enhance our understanding of the creation of cultural archives deeply embedded in post-colonial discourses of difference. Thank you.